estimates. We have with us today, once again, Minister responsible for the Phoenix pay system and a couple of her colleagues. Minister Foote, welcome once again, and I would ask you to please introduce to the committee the colleagues you have with you, and then I believe you have an opening statement as well, and we'll commence immediately. Minister, over to you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's good to be back again. To my immediate left, of course, is the Deputy Minister, Marie Lemay, and to Marie's immediate left is Gavin Liddy, who's the Assistant Deputy Minister, and it's good to have both of them here with me today. So good afternoon, bonjour. I'm joined today, again, as I said, by the Deputy Minister, but thank you for the opportunity to provide you with another status update on the Government of Canada's Phoenix system. At the outset, I repeat what I have said numerous times, and that what we are discussing today is not the fault of the employees at Public Service Pay Centre in Miramichi, nor of government employees in general. In the interest of brevity, my opening statement will focus on three main areas. First, the progress we have made as reflected by the current number of pay cases. Second, the actions we have taken since Deputy Lemay appeared before you on July 28th. And third, a sense of what we expect pay administration will look like once it reaches a steady state. As I've said many times, it is absolutely unacceptable for any public servant to not be paid or to be shortchanged for work performed. Fixing pay administration is a top priority and is certainly a top priority for me as the Minister. I am committed to ensuring that federal employees get paid on time the money they are owed for work performed. Today I can report that while there are employees still affected by pay problems, there has been steady progress since the committee last met. The number that follows for the most recent complete pay period is from August the 24th to September the 7th. In the Priority 1 group, public service employees informed us that they are not receiving any pay. There were actually 59 newly reported cases in that two-week period, compared to 720 that were reported on July 18th. In the Priority 2 group, those whose pay is affected by going on leave or exiting the public service, there were 335 new cases compared to 1,100 reported on July the 18th. In the Priority 3 group, the backlog of those employees receiving their regular pay but missing supplementary pay, we started with 82,000 cases and we are now at 67,500. In late July, our call centre received an average of 2,500 calls a day and wait times were just under 4 minutes. The call centre is now receiving 1,250 calls a day on average, with a wait time of about 5 seconds. You may be wondering why there is a discrepancy between the number of cases I just stated and the numbers that I reported when I appeared before you previously. As with any major IT system transformation, challenges were expected with Phoenix, and issues did arise. When Phoenix came online, the Public Service Pay Centre was faced with a backlog of about 40,000 cases. Early on, issues related to this backlog were for the most part manageable. However, reported pay problems outpaced our capacity to respond, which is why the department took decisive action and hired additional employees. So since July the 28th, one of the two main sources of problems with the implementation of Phoenix was a large backlog of on-process pay requests. And as you heard last time, 4 additional temporary pay units were set up to handle the backlog and allow the pay centre to deal with incoming pay requests and new cases. As of late July, 57 compensation advisors had been hired to work at the temporary unit in Gatineau and at satellite offices in Winnipeg, Montreal, and Shawinigan, and those 4 offices were still being set up. They now have been up and running for several weeks, and we now have over 200 employees, 220 to be exact, and that number will go to 250, in place who are becoming more proficient with every case they handle. The other major source of pay issue relates to the learning curve of Phoenix users. Deputy Lemay explained in July that when the department introduced Phoenix, it underestimated the amount of training required. The implementation of Phoenix was much more than a new piece of software. It fundamentally changed the way government human resources needs to operate. Much more should have been done to plan and prepare for this significant shift. Resources that were allocated for the implementation of Phoenix were not sufficient to ensure a smooth and successful rollout. To fill this gap, Public Services and Procurement is holding training sessions for human resources staff across the government. 14 sessions have been scheduled this month that addresses those most common for users. The sessions also allow the department to gather feedback that is used to adjust training materials and find ways to enhance the system. The department continually renews its website with updated tools, technical guides, and frequently asked questions. Deputy LeMay is working closely with her deputy colleagues, with the chief financial officers and heads of human resources across government to identify the problems that are arising and how to solve them. There's also a constant flow of information to human resources staff and Phoenix representatives across government to highlight ways to prevent common issues. As well, we have a process for continuously improving Phoenix. The department is working with IBM and pay specialists to identify ways to help our pay advisors more efficiently process payments. Our goal is to make it easier for our pay advisors to get pay flowing to their colleagues throughout the government. While these efforts are critical, they do not provide much comfort to those who have experienced pay issues. We are working tirelessly to help each and every employee experiencing a problem with his or her pay. No employee need to go without pay. I strongly encourage employees to request the emergency salary advances that can be provided by their own departments or through our Phoenix feedback form. Employees who have received emergency advances or been incorrectly overpaid will have these amounts recovered over multiple pay periods to reduce the associated financial burden. And on September 15th, Treasury Board Secretariat announced a process to reimburse employees for any out-of-pocket expenses incurred as a result of missing pay, such as financial penalties for missed or late payments. Employees can claim such expenses through their own departments using a form found on the Canada.ca website, as long as they have receipts and documentation. Returning to the backlog for a moment, Deputy LeMay made a commitment to clear the backlog by October the 31st, and I am told we intend to meet that date. We are starting to see our satellite units becoming more operational and processing more transactions daily. The bulk of the transactions in the backlog should be addressed between the end of September and the end of October, which is when we will have the majority of our compensation advisors processing cases at full capacity. Clearing the backlog alone will not bring us to what we call a steady state, however, and the temporary pay units will remain in place, and I have said that repeatedly as well. They will remain in place until we have reached steady state. We will have reached steady state when pay requests are processed efficiently, consistently, and with minimal errors. We have made progress through the remedies we have put in place, but we still have a distance to go. Many partners have helped us get there. Key among these are the unions, who have been instrumental in helping us identify problems and staff the temporary pay center in Gatineau and the 3 additional pay hub units. Deputy LeMay and I have visited the pay center and met with employees there in Miramichi. Employees heard it directly from me. They have my full support, and in no way should they feel this situation is of their making. I have seen firsthand the hard work and commitment of employees involved with the Phoenix Initiative. These employees are hardworking and dedicated to getting our pay system back on track. They have collectively stepped up to ensure that public service employees throughout the country are being paid for their work. In June, I requested a review by the Auditor General of Canada, and I'm pleased to report that he has agreed to perform a financial and performance audit of Phoenix. The department is also committed to an independent assessment of the planning and implementation of Phoenix, which of course dates back many years. What has been learned from this experience will be used in planning for future projects. So we're pleased to be here today to answer your questions, and I look forward to having the opportunity to do so.
Thank you very much, Minister. And colleagues, it's my understanding, Minister, perhaps you could confirm this, you will be able to be with us until 4:30.
I will.
The other, Madame Lemay and Monsieur Goulidi, will be with us for the second hour from 4:30 to 5:30, at which time we'll go in camera for some community business. Now, Minister, we'll follow the usual procedure for questions and answers. The first round of questions will be a 7-minute round. We'll start off with the government side. Madame Ratanzi, please, for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Minister, for being here, and thank you for the update. It is commendable that you're trying to do your best to mitigate some of the challenges and problems left by the previous government. And it's an interesting one because people don't understand what really happened. And the Globe and Mail article really paints a very bad picture. It says Canada isn't some tin pot country that can't pay its workers. It's a G7 country. Stephen Harper's Conservative government was eager to demonstrate it could wring billions of dollars of savings out of a fat government bureaucracy it neither liked nor trusted, and brought in the Shared Service Canada and the Phoenix system. Both have been unmitigated disasters. Now, you know, how do you put in a system without training the workers, by firing payroll, 1,000 people who were payroll advisors who have now taken on different jobs? And I think it is important for people to realize that your department and the government has been working hard, but there is still more work to be done. As you mentioned, it is important that no government or no employee goes without pay. And I understand that you have opened up satellites in Winnipeg, in Shawinigan, in Montreal, and a temporary call center in Toronto. Could you tell me, in your current assessment, how long will those centers be left open?
Thank you for the question. And early on, I committed to keeping those centers open for as long as we needed to keep them open. The idea being that we're looking at hiring 250 compensation advisors, and we need to be able to make sure that we get to what we call a steady state. The definition of that steady state we don't have yet. Of course, we're looking to past practice to determine what was steady state, but with a new system, we'd like to think that that will be better than it has been in the past. But in order to get there, in order to make sure that as few employees as possible go without pay for work performed, if all of the information is entered correctly, then we want to make sure that these individuals who we've hired to help, particularly help out our employees who are in Miramichi, who are doing a really good job, but who need some help from time to time. We want to make sure that we keep the people we're hiring until we no longer need them.
So the backlog that will be targeted to be covered by October 31st, do you think we will be able to meet, you will be able to meet that, or your department will be able to meet the deadline of October 31st?
And that's a question I continue to ask, because it's really important for me to have that comfort as minister that we are doing everything we possibly can to clear up that backlog, bearing in mind that 40,000 of that 82,000 actually came from the previous system. It predated Phoenix. And this is why we ended up with 80,000 as a backlog, because of course when you brought a new system on stream and you had the employees in Miramichi who were trying to deal with not only the daily cases that they had, employees who were needing to be paid, but they also then had the backlog of 40,000 to deal with. So that just created more of a backlog. So that's how we ended up with the 80-some-odd thousand. We are working really hard, and we're finding that the more experience that the public service employees who are working on the Phoenix system have and get to work on the system, then the better they are at doing it. And this is not through no fault of their own that they're not better at doing it, but I think you indicated at the outset that one of the things that we have found is that the employees who are expected to do this work were expected to do so without sufficient training.
And of course, sufficient training, and the ones that had training were let go, and so they found different other jobs. So the lack of planning, the lack of testing the system, and the lack of dollars now leads you to not realize any savings. In fact, the Harper Conservatives had realized a savings of $70 million, which will probably now go into millions in deficit. Do you have any sense of how much?
I think the previous government had looked at saving $70 million annually. So this year they would have been saving $70 million as a result of the introduction of Phoenix and yes, the elimination of some 700 positions, compensation advisors. So that and decisions that were made around the training that was required, but not determined to be a path that this previous government should have gone down, then we're going to look at spending, I would say, in the realm of about $50 million. So instead of $70 million, whether or not we'll even realize on the 20, we don't know because, of course, as I said, Treasury Board has already introduced as well measures that will enable them to help those employees who are finding themselves hard done by because of issues associated with Phoenix.
And Minister, when I was in Newfoundland, the staff at Miramichi were very stressed out, and I understand you visited them. Do you have a sense of their well-being now? Have you given them assurance? Have they received extra help, extra training? Are they now in a good place?
We are working very closely with the union, and we need to because, of course, they are there. They know exactly the stress levels that the employees are experiencing. But I can tell you that when I met with them, they want to do their very best, and they're working really hard. We put in place employee assistance personnel to work with them, to help them, particularly to deal with stressful situations. But I went there purposely to tell them that what is happening with Phoenix is not anything of their making, that in fact this is happening and that really in terms of the measures that should have been taken in advance as the previous government decided that they were going to go with Phoenix, that maybe a little more thought should have gone into measures that should have been taken to make sure that if you have a vision for a new payroll system, then the focus should not be on realizing savings. You should first realize your vision and then get your savings once your vision has been realized.
Thank you, Minister. Monsieur Blaney, for 7 minutes, please.
Monsieur le Président, merci. Alors,
Mr. Chair, thank you. In the speech by the minister, she said that everything will be solved by October 31st. So unlike my colleagues across the way, I won't make partisan politics. There are thousands of Canadians who are running after their pay right now who don't have pay. Madam Minister, you were asked earlier, you asked me if I had a good summer, and I said yes, because thankfully I received the salary that I was entitled to. But that wasn't the case for someone who works for the Coast Guard who is owed $8,000. It's not someone who earns a lot of money, but he doesn't have any pay. He can't make his mortgages. He can't pay for groceries. And you saw the pathetic case that was reported in the media of a woman who came back from sick leave for having breast cancer, and she had experienced an administrative nightmare. These people did not have a good summer, and that's why we're here today. It's not for partisan politics. We want solutions, and that's the reason why I'm telling you, Mr. Chair, that I intend to table a motion to invite the minister to tell us what was the state of the situation with the data that they currently have, because this is a disaster. This is a catastrophe. And what's upsetting is that we had the opportunity to invite you and Minister Bryson and and you said everything is going well. I have an excerpt from March 16th where the Deputy Minister of Public Works said, "We are just about to open the champagne bottle." Well, I would say you should put that back on ice, because there are some people who aren't being paid and they need that pay. These are Canadian families. And then on April 19th, 1 month later, it was said if there are 1% problems, we won't throw out the machine. Well, if there are 300,000 public service employees, that is 3,000. Things aren't going very well right now. It's well above 1%. Minister, you knew from the very beginning that the program was not ready to be rolled out. Why did you give the green light when you knew that it was going to be an absolute mess? I will ask this in English to facilitate translation.
Despite having been briefed on potential risks which could threaten the financial livelihood of Canadian families.
Thank you for the question. First, let me correct something you said at the outset, and that at no point did I say that come October the 31st, everything will be solved. That is not what we said. We said the backlog of cases, the 82,000, is what the department is telling me will be solved. That doesn't mean we won't continue to have challenges. We are talking a payroll system here of 300,000 employees. There is no payroll system in the country, I would expect, where you don't have challenges if you have a payroll of even half of that magnitude. So what we are telling you is that when we get to what is referred to as steady state, where you know you're going to have some challenges, nothing of the magnitude that we're having now, but the reality is that we will always have challenges. Will we have thousands of people going without pay? I hope not. That's certainly not where my head is at. And I have said repeatedly that it is totally unacceptable for any public service employee to go without pay for work performed. So to suggest that that would be acceptable to anyone is certainly not. I too have seen the stories that you have referenced, and my heart aches for those individuals who are impacted. I too have constituents who are finding themselves in the same situation. Of course it's not acceptable. And we are doing everything we can to deal with that. So when you talk about hitting a green light, what was really interesting is that if you look at the decision made by the previous government, and I know you have referenced about partisanship, and I try and steer away from that because my issue is to solve the problem. My issue is not to continue to point fingers. But the reality is that what we inherited meant that 700 compensation advisors had been let go by the previous government. So employees who have been doing the very work that you're now asking me why the work is not getting done, they were let go by the previous government. So it's kind of hard when I say, are you sure this is going to work? Are you sure I'm not going to face issues here? Are you sure that employees are not going to go without pay? Are you sure we're ready to go with Phoenix? And I'm told every time, after every briefing note, ready to go, ready to go, ready to go. And that is based on the information that would have come from the previous government's decision to implement Phoenix. So the reality is that you're asking me questions here. If those employees had not been let go, if the vision had been allowed to proceed without trying to realize $70 million in savings, I'm expecting that we would not be finding ourselves in the same situation we're in today.
Minister,
but it's mine to fix.
Well,
and I'm going to fix it with the department.
Well, I expect that you will fix it, and I would really appreciate if you come back in a month from here and confirm what you've just said a few minutes ago regarding the backlog. Your deputy minister is committed to eliminate. I have here a fancy chart which says we are at, let me see, where is this fancy chart here, because I just have to go on your website, 67,500. This is the backlog. This is those who are waiting to get paid for what they did and what they earn and what they honestly deserve to be paid. Madam Minister, I disagree with you whether we have a problem of trust or a problem of judgment, whether you were misinformed, which is a big problem, whether you made the decision, and this is what we are told, that you had your civil servant telling you the system was not ready, you had the consultant telling you the system was not ready. Now we entered into this, we are into this mess, and what is even more frustrating for us here on the position is we were told all along the way, oh, it's minor, we have set a little emergency and we are setting this, only a couple of dozen, I would say, were impacted.
Mr. Blaney, excuse me, I'm going to have to interrupt there. I suspect you could go on for quite some time, and I'm sure that the minister will respond accordingly, but we do have some time constraints before us, so we can have all members ask questions of the minister. Minister, I think you understand where Mr. Blaney is coming from. You may want to phrase a bit of a response in your subsequent answers, but from now, we're going to go into Mr. Weir for 7 minutes.
Thank you. Madam Minister, last time you appeared before this committee, I asked about the Phoenix pay system, and you indicated that there were only 77 unresolved cases. Now, after Parliament adjourned, the government acknowledged that there were 80,000 employees who had been paid incorrectly, but promised that that would be rectified by the end of October. You've repeated that date today, but it strikes me that with 67,500 outstanding cases, that the government's not actually on track to resolve that backlog by the end of October. So I wonder if you could just speak to that timeline of going from 80,000 in July to 67,000 in September to having it resolved by October.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. And I am as on top of this as you expect me to be and want me to be, and asking the same questions, because I need the assurance, and the employees who are going without pay need the assurance that they are going to be compensated for work performed. So there's not a day goes by when that question doesn't get asked, are we going to meet the October 31st deadline? I ask that question of the Deputy Minister. I ask that question of anybody who has anything to do with the Phoenix system. And I am told that based on the number of additional employees we have hired, looking at the number of employees who are getting paid as a result of the additional employees having been hired, looking at the efficiencies that are being realized in Miramichi as employees become much more familiar with the system, I am being told that that October 31st deadline is a real deadline. We are talking about the backlog, and you understand that, because I think there was some concern.
So you have confidence that the 67,500 cases that are the current backlog will be resolved by the end of October? Not just that you're being told that, you yourself believe that deadline.
I have no reason not to believe it based on the information that I've been given and the work that's being done in the department. So I'm every day at the same thing, not just because I want the backlog cleared up, I want employees to get paid for work performed.
Okay. Now, Madam Minister, you've made the point that the Phoenix pay system was a flawed plan inherited from the previous government, but in the end, it was your government that rushed ahead with implementing that flawed plan, despite repeated warnings that the system was not ready. Now, one possibility is that the implementation was rushed so that senior officials could meet deadlines to qualify for performance bonuses. I think you've indicated that performance bonuses will not be paid out this year, but I just want to clarify whether top officials who implemented Phoenix might have accrued bonuses that could be paid out at a later date.
Thank you for the question, but I have to tell you that my mind has not been focused at all on performance bonuses. That is not where I am when it comes to dealing with this file. And we are determined to fix a broken system, a system that, while we inherited it, and I repeat again, it's mine to fix. So I'm not prepared to say we rushed into it, because I know that I repeatedly asked questions, but the reality is that when asked the question if we could go back, could we go back to the other system, I was told no, because of course you had these 700 compensation advisors who had been let go, you had systems that had been changed, and there was no going back. I asked the question, can we go back?
When you suggest that it wouldn't have been possible to maintain the previous system for a bit longer while these bugs in Phoenix were worked out, are you suggesting that if the government had not gone ahead with implementing Phase 2 of Phoenix, that more than 80,000 federal employees would have been paid incorrectly as a result?
No, what I'm telling you is that when I asked the question whether or not we could run two systems, and I was told no, that would not work. We could not run two systems. We have Phoenix. People are being trained on Phoenix. The system is there, and there was no going back. All of those questions, believe me, were asked when we looked at
but it's not a
whether
question
or
of
not.
going back. It's a question of, just slowing things down and maintaining the system that was in place. And I think a lot of people, including people in the federal public service, recommended that, and yet your government barreled ahead with the implementation of Phoenix, which has been a disaster. So on the one hand, you're acknowledging the problem, but on the other hand, you still seem to be suggesting that it was the right decision to go ahead with implementing Phase 2 of Phoenix.
I was told that we could not run both systems simultaneously.
Okay, so is the person who told you that going to have some accountability?
Well, the buck stops with me. I'm the minister responsible,
Okay.
and I'm the one who has to fix the system working with the department. So it doesn't matter who told me what, but the reality is that all of those questions were asked, and what we have to do now is fix the system so there are no public service employees going without pay for time worked.
Okay, so there's been some questions about the cost of cleaning up the Phoenix mess, and I'm not sure we really have a final tally of what all these pay centers, compensation to employees, lawsuits are going to cost, but there was a figure of $50 million put out, and that included an additional $6 million to IBM for 24/7 monitoring of Phoenix. And I guess what I'm wondering is, what obligations did IBM have under the original contract? And I mean, why are we now paying IBM more money rather than perhaps expecting IBM to compensate taxpayers for its role in this boondoggle?
A very brief answer, if that's possible.
What IBM is being paid to do now was not part of their original contract, in terms of they would not have been paid for that because it's something new. Gavin, am I right on that?
Sure, that's correct.
Thank you very much. The final 7-minute intervention will go to Mr. Whalen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Minister, for coming to join us today. It's obviously a difficult situation. I have had employees in my office this summer, part-time employees who had difficulty getting their pay. I also had employees who were continuing to receive pay after they stopped working following the winter semester. So there can be problems on both sides of the coin. And as I looked into it, I learned that historically, there's a certain amount of overpay and underpay that happens in the government system throughout. Can the department provide us some information on what the typical year-over-year overpay, underpay is, so we can get a sense of what steady state might look like based on the past 4 or 5 years under the previous system?
I'm not able to provide you with that right away. Maybe in the next hour we'll be able to. That's okay.
Okay.
Brigitte will be joining us.
So we'll get that information.
Okay, well, fair enough. In addition to the backlog of these priority 3, the supplemental pay problems up until June the 30th, I have a real concern that there is a continuing or perhaps an ongoing problem with new supplemental pay requests since June 30th, which might be building up. Can the department give us some sense of whether or not supplemental pay, which accrued in July, has been paid in August or early September, or whether or not there is a secondary backlog that might be developing, and what the magnitude of those, what steady state might look like in terms of overtime pay errors for 320,000 public servants?
Thank you for the question. So if we're looking at extra duty pay, now an employee can actually go into the system and put in their hours, and their managers can approve them, and it doesn't even go through the pay centers. So that is now automatic, and they normally get it within 8 to 15 days, depending on how long it takes for managers to approve and the process to take place. So the second part of your questions, there are transactions coming in the pay center, and we've said all along that we have not reached our full operational capacity. People are still learning at all levels, and we're getting used to the system. So we know that we're not processing transaction as quickly as we will when we reach steady state, but we are making progress. So as soon as the backlog has been addressed, the 82,000 employee cases that we have addressed, we will have the satellite units that are there. So that's over 200 compensation advisors ready to help Miramichi to help us get to our steady state, and we'll be able to process all within service standards. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Minister, we've heard a lot about training having been the major part of the problem. Do you feel that it would have prevented the problem, or are there other causes such as understaffing during the transition that really led to the overworked nature of the employees in Miramichi? Or perhaps, was the phase one period in terms of that February to late April period, was that too short a timeline in which to determine whether or not people were not getting supplemental pay processed? Was there a problem in the process beyond just the understaffing and the training?
It's become pretty obvious that there wasn't sufficient training done. In fact, I spoke with IBM, with the president of IBM, because I wanted to know what had transpired leading up to Phoenix actually coming on stream. And it was made clear to me that obviously there's a cost associated with training, depending on the degree of training that you decide to go with. And it was made clear to me that the previous government opted to go with the train-the-trainer model versus actually buying into what IBM had advocated in terms of the amount of training that really needed to take place with Phoenix. So when I asked, again, from my perspective, I guess that was a real eye-opener for me, given the magnitude of this and a payroll system where you have 300,000 employees, that you would opt for the train-the-trainer model instead of looking to make sure you have as much hands-on training as you possibly can. But I think this goes again to the bottom line of trying to realize savings before you've accomplished what you set out to accomplish. And this is why we are finding now that those employees who are working so hard with the right training are doing a really good job, really quick studies, but I think the reality is that they weren't given that opportunity when they should have been.
Outside training of the pay staff themselves, is there a problem with training of managers or individual employees? And is the use of a self-service model, paying employees to track their own time, is that really efficient? I mean, we don't pay people to, do cleaning within the buildings or to deliver all their own mail within buildings in government. Is paying employees to enter their own time and manage their own pay, is that really an efficiency when you look at the greater productivity associated with, especially high-level employees with high salaries, having them spending time doing this when perhaps payroll clerks might have been a more efficient way to do it?
The thinking behind the self-serve is that this becomes a much more interactive system, and for the employee at any level, it gives them access quickly to information, direct entry. I would argue, I was asked, what does it do for the future generation of public service? I think that's actually the type of system that the future generation of public service will really enjoy, because it gives them access directly. They have the control of how they enter, when they enter some of the information. So on that front, I think that the self-serve portion is one that is appreciated. It does require, though, a change in the way we do business, and you're quite right. That's the part that I believe, and you've heard the minister say, we've underestimated. The impact that in terms of the way to do HR and the change in how we're going to manage our business, that impact was underestimated. So part of the reason why we are where we are.
And I guess if the impact was underestimated, Minister, are we expecting then that the steady state number of employees in Miramichi will be higher than its current complement in order to maintain the quality service that we ultimately will come to expect from Phoenix when it achieves its potential?
That may very well happen. I certainly am not ruling that out. What I am saying is that the 250 additional employees we've hired to help with the backlog and to help the employees at Miramichi, we're going to have to look at the numbers. We have 590 in Miramichi, so in the other 4 pay hubs, altogether. There are about 200. There will be 250 by the time we're finished. So does that mean that once we reach steady state, if we're able to determine, well, we don't need the additional 250, then that may very well speak for itself and say, well, if we can, with the training that we're doing now and the experience that the employees at Miramichi are getting as a result of this, that they will be able to become much more efficient, again, working with the, with the cases that they have now. Maybe we won't need additional employees, but until we're at a position where we can feel comfortable that the employees in Miramichi are able to do the job expected of them, given the proper resources to do the job, then we're going to hold on to the 250 because we want to make sure that we have that we fix the problem.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. McCauley, 5 minutes, please, and I'll try and catch your eye and let you know when there's 2 minutes left in
Minister,
your
I want to get
intervention.
back to the point we brought up in July at the emergency meeting, and Mr. Ware, about the bonuses. We asked, there were no bonuses paid last year. I have to ask, this is nothing but a tobacco fiasco, whatever term you want to use for it. $50 million of taxpayers' money wasted. Countless, tens of thousands of public civil servants affected by this, and yet you're still entertaining paying out bonuses to the people who brought this disaster. How is that possible? Why can you not just sit right now and say, I'm making it a focus, we will not pay a penny of bonuses to anyone involved in this program? I'm flabbergasted why you sit there and say it's not your focus.
Because
50 million wasted, tens of thousands of public servants hurt, and it's not your focus. We would like to hear right now you're not going to do that.
It is not my focus. I have not even had a discussion in terms of paying out bonuses. I am focused on making sure.
Ask right now that you state, for the record, you will not pay bonuses to anyone involved in this fiasco.
You know, I am not even versed in how the public service gets paid bonuses, because that is not where my head has been. That has not been the discussion that we have had. It's been, let's fix the problem.
So
if the deputy can speak to where we are with bonuses, by all means. But from my perspective as a minister responsible for fixing this problem, that's where my focus has been and continues to be.
That's great that we're fixing it. I would suggest so that you take a look around the country and get feedback. I don't think there's a lot of will to be paying out bonuses for people who squandered $50 million of taxpayers' money.
I'm not sitting here telling you that I'm interested in paying out bonuses. I'm sitting here telling you that that's not at all where my focus is.
Thank you. Let me move on just quickly. We've heard partisan, nonpartisan, however you wish to term it, bad-mouthing or blaming the previous government for Phoenix. We have yourself March 10th stating that Phoenix is an example of innovation of the future of government operations, proven to be a success. May 17th, absolutely a good idea to move to Phoenix. How do you reconcile those glowing remarks about Phoenix and sitting here today blaming everything on the previous government?
I'm not.
You're saying, or is it a success, as you said?
Well, it's when you look at Phoenix and you look at, and you're the one, is saying, well, I'm not, and I don't want to be in the blame game with this, but the realities are the realities, okay? They are. They are what they are, and that Phoenix was an initiative of the previous government. And the previous government... Oh.
Yeah. Thank you. Blaming the previous government is like taking home a nice steak from the butcher and then burning it and blaming the butcher. You yourself stated it's an example of the future of government operations. It's a success.
It can be.
To sit here, so perhaps we should change. Perhaps Hansard had it wrong in your comments. How do you sit here? I'm just curious. You stated all along no one advised you not to press the button to go ahead with Phoenix, even though we heard in January PSAC said, don't do this. We've also heard recently consultants who were at the very beginning of the project, I understand, put in writing to your department, it's not ready, don't go ahead. Why did we go ahead and start this? We heard from the staff, we heard from the ground level, the union, the consultants, don't do this. It's not like it was May, or it wasn't like part 2, we're saying don't go ahead. Part 1, they said don't do this, and yet we still did.
As the minister responsible, I was told we were in a ready-to-go state, that the Phoenix was
Also had the
ready to
consultants
go.
who were implementing this program, I understand, told your department, don't go ahead. Is that true?
So I'll make sure that Gavin gives you the background on the consultant, how they're leading up to. But what is very clear is that we did recommend to the minister, ready to go. We did, with all the information we had, with the consultants, with the third party, with all the
Are you saying
testing.
the consultant said to go ahead?
Well, so can I let you go with this, Gavin?
So we did have an independent third-party review as part of the Treasury Board process for monitoring projects. It's a gated process that has checks at every step. So Gate 6 was the final step before we went live. And
Relating who the third party was?
the third party was SI Systems.
Okay. Did any other third parties tell you not to go ahead that were involved in this
That
program?
was the only third party that we had on the project. I know Treasury Board Secretariat had their own.
No other consultants were working on the implementation of Phoenix.
No.
Mr. McCauley, perhaps you can get in their second hour, you can get back to that with Mr. Liddy, but we're past the 5 minutes, and so now we'll go to Monsieur Ayoub. 5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for appearing before us once again, Madam Minister. It's always a pleasure to see you. I have mixed feelings, as I'm torn between embarrassment and discomfort when I hear my colleagues across the way who are wringing their hands over a situation that started last July 28th to talk about the urgency and the committee focusing on this emergency. And today what I see is that we are looking at who is the guilty party when we want to, well, we're spending very little time on the current problems of the people affected on a daily basis. And I see that things are improving in the reports that we've received. There is light at the end of the tunnel despite the significant problems we spoke about. We talked in great detail about some of these problems, but when we can't blame someone and also ask them to fix things. So we're identifying problems, and that's what you're doing. I'd like you to tell us a little bit more about the current situation, about the number one priority. And there are some people who say that they've never received pay. There are other things done to compensate them. Can you tell us once again the things that the department is doing to improve this? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. And every time I hear that there's a public service employee who's performed their job and who has not gotten paid, it's really disturbing for me, because nobody, as I've said repeatedly, should not get paid for work performed. This is why when we started to hear about people not getting paid, we made sure that every department knew and understood how important it was to make their employees aware of the opportunity to avail of emergency pay, so that we would not have individuals out there going without being able to pay a mortgage or being able to, whatever they need there in their paycheck for. So for us, when we had individuals, we were hearing about individuals who weren't able to, or who weren't getting paid, then that was an issue for us, and it was a concern for us, because we knew that every department had the ability to write an emergency check, so that no one should have to go without pay. Then when we were hearing that some departments were actually taking the money back in one fell swoop, we said that's not right either, because you need to be able to give people a pay system in order to pay the money back, the additional money that they've got. So the emergency pay was really important for us to make sure that public servants who work so hard did in fact get a check. We wanted to make sure that...
Si je peux une précision, combien de temps ça prend?
How much does it take for someone to receive an emergency payout? How much, is it a week? A few days?
in 24, 48 hours. In our department, we turn them around in 24 hours.
Donc, il n'y a pas de raison, donc,
So there's no reason, well, it's called emergency pay. There's no reason for someone who didn't receive a check in 24 to 48 hours and temporary compensation. We understand that it's emergency, but that doesn't mean they won't be paid a certain way. But the situation is being solved in the long term. I have a small question. We're talking about IBM and audits and an eventual postmortem. Are there currently other systems that are being implemented by IBM in the near future? Are there measures that will be taken to not repeat the problems of the past?
And on a des programmes qui existent, mais je suis pas sûre.
We have programs that exist, but I'm not sure whether the supplier is IBM or another company. Perhaps we could come back to that in the next hour.
Minister, we have only 5 minutes. I must tell you, I was always told that we should reward success, not reward failure. I am disappointed this afternoon that as the leader of the department who is in charge of this big mess, we have to say. 60,000 Canadian families are not being paid, are still trying to catch up with their current expenses, that you don't care that they get a bonus for this mess. I'm not at ease with this, and I think many Canadians are not at ease with having bonuses for rewarding a mess like this. My question to you this afternoon is, what are the steps, I would say the different steps, you will take until October the 34th to eliminate that backlog, since you told us, and we were told as early as 6 months ago, that everything was fine? And I also like to hear you, what about once this whole thing, I got some money, I sent back, I got the money, how will we deal with the T4, I would say, mess? How can you anticipate not when the income, when those people will have to pay their income? Can you reassure us, at least, those who are waiting for their money, those who have got too much, not enough, that they won't have to be illegal or to pay too much income and go through another nightmare when income will come in March next year?
Well, let me start out by acknowledging, as I have time and time again, that it is totally unacceptable for the individuals who are in this backlog to continue to be in that backlog. That's why we have implemented the measures we have to deal with that. Because again, no one should, go without pay for work performed. There are 300,000 public service employees getting paid every 2 weeks. So through Phoenix, we have the regular payroll system working. Will there be challenges? There will always be challenges, and I said that at the outset to you. You will never have a payroll system of this magnitude where you won't face challenges, but nothing of the magnitude that we're experiencing now. And that's why we have taken all the measures that we've taken to deal with the issues that we're dealing with until we get to a steady state, whatever that steady state will be. From my perspective, it's going to be really important that we do everything we can to make sure that there are no further hardships experienced by public service employees as a result of Phoenix. So that's why Treasury Board has put in place a process to help those employees and to respond positively to those employees who come forward suggesting that they've incurred additional interest charges or that they've had other problems as a result of Phoenix. So we have put a lot of measures in place, and we will do whatever we have to do to fix the system. And yes, I'm the minister responsible, and I take this personally, and it is really important from my perspective that employees out there who work so hard get compensated for the work performed.
I want to believe that this, thank you. I want to believe that this mess will be resolved. I believe that for those who are impacted, this is a great news. But still, it's been 6 months on the go, and the disaster has just gone bigger and bigger. Now, I hope that all the colleagues around this table will support this motion to ask the minister to come and give us an update. Minister, would you be ready to come and give us an update by or around October the 31st to give us an update and reassure us on the current status and tell us that those civil servants will be and are being dealt with and will be eliminated from that backlog.
Absolutely, I will.
Well, this is what Canadians want to hear. They want to see us working to make sure we are solving those issues. They don't want to see us throwing mud. But once again, Minister, I must tell I'm disappointed that we have gone to such a big mess because this is impacting many families. And please be prepared when you come back to answer what is the aftermath, because there are people who are being paid on one way. They will have to reimburse. We really want to get to understand so that they are not double, go through deux cauchemars au lieu d'un. Merci beaucoup.
2 nightmares instead of 1. Thank you very much.
Well, there's no one around this table who wants to see this issue resolved more than I do. And we are committed to doing just that, which is precisely why we're taking all the measures we are. In spite of the situation in which we found ourselves, we have put that behind us, and what we're doing is working very closely with the unions who are working with us, and they've identified people to work with us in our pay centres. We're working within the department. Again, we're doing everything we possibly can, working with Treasury Board to make sure that any employees who suffer hardships, that we're able to deal with those for them. So a lot of measures are being taken, but the bottom line here is that we have to get the system in place that works. It's a huge payroll system for the country, and we want to make sure that measures are put in place to respond positively to them so that we, at the end of the day, we end up with employees who are getting paid for work performed.
Thank you, Minister. Madame Shanahan, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here with us today. I'd like to explore just a little bit the kind of cases that we're talking about, and I don't want to take up the whole time with that because we can talk about that a little bit more in the second hour. But just to give us an idea, we're not talking about someone, who are the people that we're talking about? What are the kind of cases? I have a little bit of background in payroll and tax, and I know that there's no 2 cases that are the same.
Well, initially, one of the issues that were brought to my attention was that students weren't getting paid. And when I questioned that, knowing that students don't have savings accounts, so like, how is it possible that we can't pay our students when they come to work with us? Why would we not be able to do that? And it was pointed out to me that, but that's the way it's always been. The students never did get paid up front, and that it sometimes took students the 2 months that they worked during the summer before they got paid, which for me is totally unacceptable.
Even before Phoenix?
Yes, predated Phoenix. And don't forget, the 40,000 of the backlog cases that we're talking about predated Phoenix as well. So there are issues there under the old system, again, that would need to have been dealt with. And what we're hoping Phoenix will do is deal with those so that we never again find ourselves in a situation where students come in to work in the federal public service and don't get paid. New hires. Because information was being entered manually in some cases, if the information didn't get entered quickly, or if it sat on a desk for a week, or for whatever reason it didn't get entered, then that would delay that individual getting paid. The other case we have overtime. So, and a lot of, and I know Mr. Blaney mentioned, Coast Guard, people who go to sea, people who are at sea for a period of time and don't get to, their overtime is not entered into the system, then that delays them getting their overtime. So these are just some examples of what we're dealing with. But having said that, again, when I ask these questions, is that this is not tied to Phoenix, per se. These are the student overtime, new hires, people who are changing jobs, going on to another job, for instance. If it's not entered in, it takes a while for them to get on payroll system. So there are any number of situations that come into play here. That doesn't make it right. And that's what our job, our challenge is now, is to get to a steady state that we believe is where it should be in terms of ensuring that public service employees get paid for the work performed.
Interesting. So indeed, Phoenix, the introduction of Phoenix was intended to address these long-standing problems and to overall make a system that was much more responsive, self-serve. I'm sure we're going to hear a little bit more about that in the second hour. That didn't happen, off to an incredibly chaotic start. And I wouldn't worry about paying out bonuses to anybody, because these people have to get paid first before anybody else gets bonuses. So c'est pas un problème là, pour le moment. But
It's not a problem for the moment.
to the Auditor General to investigate the root causes of what went wrong here, because I think we need to, at a future point, we do need to have some lessons learned and to ensure that this does not happen again.
Well, the issue for me was, as we talk about modernizing IT systems throughout government, modernizing payroll, looking at enterprise initiatives, the issue for me was what went wrong. Like, how do we make sure this never happens again? Knowing that we had 80,000 backlog of and I hate calling them cases, because these are people. These are people who are impacted here. So every time I hear the word case, I kind of shudder, because I know that for every payroll that we talk about where someone's not getting paid, that's impacting someone's life. That's an individual. That's a person. So we need to make sure that we do that. So from my perspective, calling in the Auditor General was as a result of saying, okay, what happened here? When the previous government decided to go down this path, now don't get me wrong, it was a 40-year-old system.
Minister, I'm going to have to really get you, if I could, possibly to wrap up.
Okay, it was a 40-year-old system that had failed completely on occasion, had to be changed. So my question is, in changing it, what steps were taken to ensure that we were ready, that all the training necessary was done, that we were ready with Phoenix, so that we would not ever again find ourselves in the situation that we're in today?
Thank you, Minister. I have to ask one question. Would you be available for 3 additional minutes?
Yes.
We'll go to Mr. Weir for a 3-minute round, and that will complete this round. And we'll then suspend for a couple of minutes while you take your leave, Minister. Thank you. Mr. Weir.
Okay, well, thank you. In the previous round, you said a couple of times that there was no going back to the previous system. But of course, for several months, from February to April, the two systems did function concurrently. And I'm wondering why it wasn't possible to just continue that for a few more weeks or months until these glitches in Phoenix were sorted out.
I was told there was no going back. I was told because we had moved on to different systems and we were gradually moving into Phoenix 100%. As well, the fact that, in terms of moving to a new system, you had fewer compensation advisors because they had been let go and people had been put into other jobs, so you couldn't bring them back to do it. So there are any number of reasons that I was given to why we had to move full steam ahead. But again, it was with the understanding that we were ready to do so.
Now, we focused a lot on the backlog of Priority 3 cases, and I guess I would ask, since that 80,000 figure was reported in July, how many new Priority 3 cases have emerged?
So Priority 3 is, as you say, the backlog of 82,000 people. Now, I'm going to use that word now, 82,000 people. So as I said earlier, we do have incoming transactions that are dealt by Miramichi, and they are dealt not at the pace that we hope they will when we are fully operational and have reached our steady state. So we are not meeting our service standards in every cases. We are, in some cases, being processed. So there's no backlog as such. It's just we are not meeting our service standards. And the minute we're done with the backlog, the 82,000 cases, the satellite unit compensation advisors will help Miramichi to get us to that steady state.
Okay, but could you quantify that failure to meet service standards? Like how many more people are getting paid incorrectly than the original 80,000 that's being whittled down?
So they're not being paid incorrectly, they're not being paid at the right time. Like there's a time of service standard, so in some cases we're not meeting the time, which we will as soon as we get to our steady state.
That's it. Thank you very much. We will suspend now for about 2 minutes while the minister takes her leave, and then we'll be back with government officials, and I believe we have one more official joining us. Thank you, and thank you, Minister. May reconvene. I would appreciate that. As you know, for the second, well, I say an hour, it'll be closer to 50 minutes now. We'll resume with the examination of the Phoenix pay schedule. Madame Lemay, do you have any opening statement, or would you like just to continue on with the questions?
The only thing I would note, Mr. Chair, is that we have a new witness with me, and it's Brigitte Fortin, who is the ADM responsible for accounting, banking, and compensation.
Then we may proceed immediately to questions. Thank you very much. That will save some time, and the first 7-minute question will go to Monsieur Drouin.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et merci, Madame Fortin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madame Lemay, Mr. Liddy, Madame Fortin, to be with us, for joining us today. I have a riding very close to Ottawa, and I have a lot of public servants who work here in Ottawa, and unfortunately they have had problems with the implementation of the Phoenix system. My question is the following. I'd like to understand, when the decision was made to let employees go, was a notice sent to these employees, because a minimum amount of time must be given before employees are let go pursuant to the legislation? Yes, there is a process. Workforce adjustment, yes. There were timelines set out for advising employees whose positions would be affected. And what is that time? In this case, employees were notified in October 2014. When I look at the information you sent us, I'm looking at priority 3, and we see that in July there were 41 employees on July 4th, and then 56. I know that you mentioned that you worked with the unions to try to seek out these compensation advisors, but I'm sure that when I receive a notice from my employer that I won't be working there anymore, they probably looked for other work. Did you find cases like that? Yes. There were all kinds of cases, but it wasn't as easy as we would have thought. And as you see, there was a plateau at the beginning. We successfully added people because we opened offices across the country, 4 of them, and the unions helped us by allowing employees who had to move to come back without being penalized. And the achievement of your objective by October 31st is tied to the number of employees you hired. Are you able to meet your objectives with the number of employees added? I noticed by the 26th of September there will be 250 employees. That is the number we're going for. And with these 250 employees by the week of September 26th, will those employees have their training? Will they be ready to work? That's a very good question, because it takes a number of weeks before people are used to the system, and you can understand when we welcome new employees, they are not functional overnight. So the type of curve that you're talking about is probably that one. That's perhaps the problem. But it's normal to expect that it will be moved forward with respect to production of the productivity of these satellite offices, because they're not fully operational overnight. Because I'm looking at the priority 3 list, and from October 5th, you have 2 pay periods to resolve nearly 40,000 cases. That's over half of your objective. And based on your information, you will reach that objective. I can understand why people are wondering about this, because it's not intuitive. You look at that and you think, well, since the beginning of July, you've reached this number of cases. How will you be able to do this and solve all of these cases that are in the backlog? But if you look at the curve of compensation advisors, it's the same principle that applies to case resolution, but pushed forward. And so that is why we still have the intention, and we think that we will be able to reach this objective of solving the backlog of 80,000 employees by the end of October. And I know that we saw in the news there are some employees who are concerned about T4s. Is the department communicating with Canada Revenue Agency if in the case that there is a problem, that you check these 80,000 cases, because there could be problems. Do you have a plan for that? That is a subject we are discussing within the federal government, with Department of Finance, but also with CRA, but also with the unions, because it is very important for employees to resolve situations as much as possible by the end of the year, so that T4s are representative of what they are paid this year. That's what we're working on. Once again, the 200 employees that are in the satellite offices that will help us reach our stable state. We will also maybe be able to use them to help us make adjustments to the T4s. Our objective is to do most of the work by the end of the year to reduce issues related to T4s, because we know that that December is a busy time. People go on leave, and it is difficult for me to go back to my riding to say, well, I don't know if you'll have the proper T4 by the December 28th, or the 28th of February, rather. One of the issues is explaining that when there are emergency payments, we followed a policy that said that we would claw back that money as soon as it was available. We stopped doing that because it wasn't very humane given the circumstances, and we wanted to ensure that people who just received an emergency payment were not being penalized immediately. So we wanted to spread that out over a number of pay periods for the recovery, the clawback. Now we are in discussions with the unions and our Treasury Board colleagues to see how much we should claw back, because the longer we do that, the more impact it has on the tax year and T4. So we were doing that within one tax year. Mr. Chair, how much time do I have left? Thank you very much.
List, Mr. Falk, do you care? If not, I'll go to
Sure.
Mr. Weir.
No, I care a lot.
I bet you do. Mr. Falk, for 7 minutes.
Good. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Deputy Minister and Assistant Deputy Ministers, for coming to committee here. It's a file I'm not intimately familiar with, but I've been trying to pick up, and certainly I've been hearing about it in the media. And I've been hearing about it from folks in my riding. In fact, as recently as 2 weeks ago, I was at an event in my riding, and I had a federal employee say, "When will this Phoenix system be fixed?" He says, "I'm on parental leave and I'm still getting paid." And he said, "But I'm trying to be smart about it. I'm putting the money away into an account, because I know they're going to ask for it back." So there's obviously problems to fix. But I hope everybody that's receiving payments that shouldn't be is as wise as this individual was, and is setting that money aside with the understanding that they're going to be asked to repay it. And people's paychecks are a very sensitive thing. I am in a construction company that I own. I employ close to 100 people, and there's a lot of things you can tamper with when it comes to employment. You can change people's job descriptions. You can change what they do. You can change their hours of work. You can change their roles and their positions, but once you've committed to paying them on a bi-weekly basis or monthly basis, that's like a sacred cow. And I know from my own experiences, we have electronic funds payments in my company, and when that payment is due on Thursday at midnight, I know Friday morning at 12:01 they're on their computer to make sure that money's in the account, because if it's not in the account, it creates lots of problems. And it creates problems with automatic payments that are due. It creates problems with checks that had written out with the understanding that the money would be in the account. And when that money doesn't show up in the account, it creates problems for these people's their livelihoods. It creates problems in their families, and because they get checks that are bounced, they get damaged credit ratings, they get overdraft charges at their banks, they get late payment notices, late payment fees, and their credit ratings are damaged. And I'm just wondering, as a department, you said that these employees are going to be compensated. How do you expect and how do you intend to compensate for some of these things?
First, just let me tell you that we are as heartbroken when we hear these stories. We want employees to get paid, and we are working so hard to fix the system and make sure that we get to our steady state as soon as possible. We have done many things. Like, one of the things that that we've done is try to prioritize our work to start with, so that if employees do not get a pay, and they should, they have a place to go. If they're not finding their way through their department, they come directly to us through some of the forms that we've put in, some of the process that we've put in place, so that we can actually know and act on it. So we've put some systems, additional system in place to make sure employees would have that. Same thing for the emergency payments. If they need them and they can't get them through their departments, we make sure that they have a process by which they can get them. We can help them get that. Now, in terms of compensations, you may have heard that our colleagues at Treasury Board have put a system in place. Claims unit has been set up, and they have on their website some of the eligible expenses. There's a cross-government process so that everybody is treated fairly and will be made whole.
That's encouraging to hear that. I guess, how do you compensate somebody for a credit rating that's been damaged? Or for a check that maybe got bounced at a local vendor or merchant? Their credibility has been damaged in their community and in their places where they do business, and that kind of compensation is very difficult. So that's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is what I find very disturbing, and just what I've been picking up here, is that prior to the rollout of the Phoenix system, IBM had raised caution flags as to the readiness of the system to go into full implementation. After that, the Public Service Association of Canada raised cautionary flags about proceeding with the secondary rollout. But in all those instances, the department proceeded anyway. What I heard here earlier is that you had a third-party outside consultant, and I'm wondering, did I hear correctly that Treasury branch also had a consultant separate to yours?
So I will let Mr. Liddy answer that, but I think it's important for me to make sure that it's clear that nobody went ahead or recommended to go ahead with a system that we thought would experience the difficulties that we did. So yes, there were some, the implementation did not go as planned, and we're not happy with that, and we're doing everything we can to fix, and we have to put a lot of measures in place. But if we would have thought that was the case, we obviously would not have proceeded with the implementation. So I'll let Gavin.
Just before you answer, when I look at it, and I see that the developer of the program is sending up caution flags, the employee union is sending up caution flags, and you proceed anyway. You even actually proceed with the hiring of a third-party outside consultant. That tells me that you recognize that maybe you needed to get a third opinion. That should have been another caution flag. Like that's 3 caution flags that were not heeded, and you proceeded anyway. And it seems kind of reckless that the department would have done that in the presence of those cautionary flags. Now we have to hire additional folks to correct the problem. We've got a problem, we've got a mess, we've got to fix it. We've got to keep our employees happy. We have to do some damage control. What's it going to cost us? What are all these extra employees going to cost us? The system was supposed to save us money, save the taxpayers money, but now it's going to cost extra money. Do you have a cost estimate what all this is going to cost?
We do. Maybe I'll let Gavin talk to the rollout of the system before, so you have the answers to your questions.
So that would be beneficial.
I'll make it short, Chair. So IBM did indeed tell us to slow down after we looked at a lot of defects in the spring of 2015. And that's exactly what we did. We delayed the rollout from October and December to January and February, and Brigitte and I met with IBM on a weekly basis and monitored the number of defects that were being cleared. And in January, IBM said we were ready to go. We also had the third party come in, not because we thought we needed one, because that is the process for managing large complex IT projects in accordance with the Treasury Board policies. So that was the Gate 6 review that we had brought in. And so we felt we were ready to go, not without concerns. We thought that there would be problems. We anticipated them. We added extra staff. We developed a war room. We put in, it just wasn't enough, obviously. When we hit February, it's clear now that it wasn't enough. But at the time, it was all systems go from our independent third party, and we also checked with departments to see if they were ready, and we got nods from them as well. So,
thank you very much, Mr. Liddy. Mr. Weir, 7 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to delve into the question of compensating employees who have not been paid through the Phoenix system. The government has announced a new process that involves the Treasury Board Secretariat, and I'm wondering how we can have confidence that employees will be compensated in a timely way and will not get caught up in another sort of administrative mess.
Now, I should really let my colleagues at Treasury Board answer that question, but we had a lot of discussions, and they have looked at this very carefully. I know they are very conscious of that and absolutely want to make sure that this process is a streamlined process, that people can have access to money quickly, and that's what they are actually putting in place, with involving all departments so that there's different levels of, I'll say, of claims, so that there's some easy processes, and the more extreme or more complicated court cases will be looked by the Treasury Board directly.
My constituency office has been dealing with a case of a contract employee who had her contract extended and is getting paid, but the Phoenix system classified her as having been terminated, so she's not receiving drug coverage. She's having to pay out of pocket for medications, and I'm wondering if that's something for which the government is prepared to compensate employees.
I'm going to look at what I see on the website here, and Gavin says yes. Yes.
Because, yeah, there's been a lot of talk about financial penalties for missing mortgage payments or tuition payments, but there will also be compensation for people who've missed out on health care benefits.
I don't see that in there.
For premiums being paid, is my understanding.
Yes, if you allow me.
Yes, please.
So for the healthcare plan, if employees are missing out to pay their deductions, so they are asking for claims and they are being refused by the insurer, there's a process in place. If there's a high financial penalty, that the insurer will honor their medical claim. And then when they are back on payroll, the deductions will be taken and they will be covered retroactively.
Okay.
So I don't know that that's part of the TBS process, though. That's a separate thing, so just to be clear.
Okay, and could you give us an estimate of how much these compensation payments are likely to amount to?
We don't have that. We were in discussions with TBS on this, and we don't have that amount.
So just to
until
clarify...
They come forward, sorry. It's just until they come forward, it'll be difficult.
So just to clarify, those compensation payments would be in addition to the estimate of $50 million for addressing Phoenix.
You're correct.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Mr. Chair, I'm inclined to make a motion. I believe the clerk has copies of it that she's able to circulate, and I would move that the Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates reopen its study of Shared Services Canada and invite former Chief Statistician Wayne Smith to appear as a witness.
Thank you. I'm just going to suspend for about 30 seconds and consult with the clerk, if I may. We're back, televised. Mr. Weir, apparently that it is not in order only because we are not in committee business. We will be going to committee business about 5:30, and certainly you can make your motion at that point in time, and we can deal with it at that time. But it has been duly noted.
Oh, okay, Mr. Chair, I think in previous meetings, including our last one, it's been possible to make motions at any time during the proceedings. Is that not correct?
I'll let our clerk go over the procedures of this committee. Clearly, anything that we do in the committee, if there's unanimity, can be done. We're the master of our own agenda.
Okay, well, I don't want to use up a lot of time on process. So if it's
Sure.
not clear that it's allowed, we can deal with it later.
Yeah.
But my understanding was that we were able
Sure.
to make motions.
Is there concurrence within the committee to allow Mr. Weir to make the motion now, or would you care to it be made in committee business?
Committee business.
We have no unanimity, Mr. Weir. You've got, unfortunately, only a couple more minutes left in your intervention.
Okay. Well, thank you. I guess one thing I did want to ask is it seems that there were real gaps in the testing of the Phoenix Pay system. It appears that of a very large number of possible pay scenarios, only a fraction were actually tested. And I wonder if you could explain why that occurred.
Are you're referring to 16,000 different pay
Yes,
scenarios
but
that were
out of,
attended?
I think, 80,000 possible scenarios.
So maybe Brigitte, you can speak to why that, or Gavin, why that number was chosen? Was it?
So what we did is we looked at there are some permutations of business rules, and the 80,000 business rules were all tested within those 16,000 scenario, because one test case can include multiple business rules. So the 80,000 business rules were tested in 16,000 different testing scenarios.
So your sense is the testing was adequate?
My sense is the testing was adequate according to IBM standard and methodology.
Okay. Now, it seems that the Phoenix pay system is somewhat similar to the boondoggle with shared services in that both were efforts to cut corners by centralizing payroll and IT systems between different departments and agencies. Our committee's already studied shared services, but that whole question has really come to a head with the resignation of the chief statistician on Friday. And I wonder if you have any comment on the similarity between these cases and what went wrong.
So the only thing I would say on this is that the initiative was an initiative of pay consolidation and pay modernization, and it was made so that we would achieve a modern and effective pay system. At the same time, there were savings. So I can't draw any parallel. But
Thank you. Monsieur Ayoub, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Merci encore une fois.
Thank you once again for your appearance before us. I'd like to come back to the issue of going back to the competition for Phoenix. Was there a call for offers issued? And when the choice was finalized, when was that done officially? Because we're talking about the implementation, but the choice of the company for IBM was made when? I'll let Mr. Liddy answer that one. Yes, we ran a competition in 2008, and there were a number of bidders. But after a fairly long competition, I believe, Brigitte, we chose IBM as the supplier of the system. But it is based on PeopleSoft. And now, well, we know the current situation. Have you had time to conduct an update of the business case for the choice of Phoenix and given the issues and the additional costs, the notion of training, and the forecasting for the coming years and months and years? We talked about savings, but you also mentioned costs. What are the forecasts for the coming years in the short term? Have you had a time to look at this, or are you still in emergency mode, trying to solve the bits and bytes to cut checks to employees? We are still very much focused on problem resolution. That is our number one priority. But we have already started looking at the causes and the future, and we have committed, and I said it perhaps already, we're committed to conducting a study of lessons learned, because it's important to see where we could have done things differently, and we must be able to adjust for the future as well. And so it's obvious that progressively we are improving the system. We are continually improving the system, but we need to study lessons learned to see how we could improve in the future. That is a step we have not yet started, but it should start shortly. Once again, if we come back to the current situation versus the beginning of the implementation, your judgment with respect to the current situation, are we on a positive curve to improve things and solving things as quickly as possible, perhaps by the end of October, if you look at the beginning of the crisis and where we are now, what kind of progress have we made? Because I've heard all kinds of things, and we're talking about how it's still exploding, or is it the opposite? Are things improving? Listen, there are 3 phases. I would say that we have set indicators. There are people who are not receiving pay. There are people who are affected by pay because they're leaving the public service. We gave access to people to allow them to share their problems. There are emergency payments. All of the indicators are moving in the right direction. Now, that being said, we are very aware that there are still people who have unresolved issues. There is the backlog that needs to be addressed, but also in current transactions, and just to speak to what I said earlier, there is a timeline that we need to improve, but there will always be errors to be corrected in this system. So we are in a period now where we are resolving the backlog. The indicators are good, and the second phase will be after October, when we will be in a transitional phase between the stable state and crisis state, if you will, where we will use compensation advisors to back up people in Miramichi to achieve our service standards, and to then reach a stable state, and then decide what we need, how many compensation advisors we need to maintain a steady state. And from that moment on, we will decide who we will let go, how many we will let go, but we will not do that until we are able to maintain the stable state. So people will be paid efficiently, on time, and under our service standards, and properly. Speaking of a steady state, what characterizes your choice of employees? Are these employees who have already worked previously in this service? Were they the ones who were laid off? Are we calling people back? People who know, perhaps people who went back to, who went and retired, and they were called back? The implementation strategy from the beginning, well, I think all the cases that you mentioned are there. People are being added to our teams in Miramichi, and those are our basic teams that will help us maintain the steady state. And the goal is to stabilize as quickly as possible this situation so that we can free up these people in the future. Absolutely. The goal is to have people in Miramichi maintain the steady state once everyone is used to the system, the change management has occurred, and the system has been improved and adjustments have been made. So there are 3 components to the system when I'm talking about the system. There's the user component, there's the IT component, and then there are the compensation advisor components. And those 3 aspects need tweaking. They need to have improvements made to them. So when all of that has been accomplished, then we will see whether the compensation advisors in Miramichi are able to maintain the steady state on their own, if it's working. And if it's not working, then we will keep other compensation advisors. Mr. Blaney. Madam Deputy Minister, if I understood correctly, you have extra centers in 4 cities. And now there are over 200 new employees who have been added to solve the issue of the compensation system in these 4 offices, yes. And you also held training sessions, additional training sessions, because the initial training session was not adequate. Yes, we held training sessions for compensation advisors, and we also have sessions for people who work in HR, and we have trained teams who go from department to department to discuss the 3 issues, the 3 most important issues identified by users to operationalize the system. And if I understood correctly, there are also improvements that have been requested by the software suppliers at IBM. You talk about 4 temporary offices training, and I imagine additional staff. And the cost to date is what? To date, how much is it costing us? how much is it costing the taxpayer to do this? We estimated the costs at $50 million. $50 million to date? Well, that is our estimate of what we know to date, yes. And of that amount, $25 million were for the satellite offices in Gatineau, Shawinigan, and 2 other cities. That was $25 million. We estimated, to be very conservative, until for the fiscal year. And then we have nearly $6 million that is going to IBM for a lot of 24/7 work, plus adjustments to the system to improve the functionalities, and then $16.1 million for additional resources to manage complaints, to be able to do a lot of 24/7 service, for a total of $50 million. So $25 million for the 4 temporary offices, plus the call center. And then there was an amount of 5.7 for IBM. That's for consultant for IBM, okay. And then 16.1 million. Can you just explain a little bit the $16.1 million? Yes, well, there are a lot of things that have been implemented since the implementation of Phoenix, among others. A team was struck for the management of complaints that we are receiving, and know that we wanted to ensure that we were able to properly manage complaints. We're offering training to the department, to compensation advisors, and to others. And then we have an internal team that must support the IBM team. And so Ms. Lemay, I understand that part of that money has already been spent, and part of it will be spent by the end of the fiscal year. So with that amount, you think that you will be able to handle the backlog by October 31st? Yes. Yes, but the backlog is 82,000 cases. Well, so 67.5 thousand. But yes, we started with 82,000. But what I want people to understand is that I'm not saying that all the problems will be solved by November 1st. We know we have a transitional period after October 31st where we will need to really adjust our capacity to reach the steady state. We need to identify how many compensation advisors we need, how many teams we need for the new system. And once people are used to the system, the $50 million is additional to the implementation costs of Phoenix. Do you have the forecasted amounts for the new implementation of the new Phoenix system? It was a $309 million system. And how many employees in normal situations or with the former system were managing the system? Because we had 200 additional people. With respect to compensation advisors, the employees tied to pay, well, before Phoenix, there were 2,000, and now we have 1,300, if I'm not mistaken, because about 700 had their positions eliminated. It would be interesting to see after whether there will be additional costs. Thank you.
Deputy Minister and your assistants for coming today. I mean, I've been sitting here and listening, and I think the one thing that we can all agree on that it's unacceptable for people for working and not getting paid. And we had those sentiments from the beginning of this problem. I've been looking at some of the numbers here, and I'm trying to come to a conclusion on this one example. If you weren't getting paid and your issue gets resolved, can you also have issues on your week-to-week pay or your supplementary pay, or if, let's say, you take a leave of absence? So is it possible that once your pay issue is resolved that you weren't getting paid, and then something in your status changes, that you can have another issue?
Well, I suppose it is possible. What I would tell you, though, is that when we're looking at cases, at employee cases, we look at all the cases that we have. So one employee will have more than one transaction that we have to address most of the time, like in the backlog, for example. One employee, there's several actions that we have to take.
Okay, so this 67,500 is representative of the number of cases, not necessarily the number of
employees.
It's employees.
Yes. Employees that have cases in the backlog.
that have cases. So would it be doubled up? So like, let's say one employee has 2 cases.
It can be probably more than that. On average, it's more than that.
Okay. Interesting. So the 67,500 represents the number of employees that have issues.
Yes.
Not generally the number of cases open then.
No, you're correct.
Okay. Interesting. The next question I have is that the most important part of this is making people whole, in my opinion. So if there's for example, a student or an employee who had to, take out a loan to pay for their, daily groceries or mortgage payments and stuff like that, you've set up a subsidy program. How can we ensure that once they claim that subsidy, that there's not a delay in that? So like, it's just like it's a double-edged sword almost.
The system is set up by our colleagues at Treasury Board, but I can tell you that they're very mindful of the very issue that you raised, and in trying not to create more issues in trying to address. So the nimbleness, the timeliness, making it as easy as possible, and making it as fair and equitable across government. And one of the parties that is working very hard with Treasury Board on this is actually the unions, because there was a lot of discussion, and they actually brought this, I believe. So a very good collaboration there, and the intent is to make it fast, streamlined, and to get the money out.
When Phoenix is fully implemented, what is the average cost savings per year for the government?
Well, if we're able to reach a steady state with the planned number of compensation advisors that was planned originally, it would be $7 million a year. $70 million a year, sorry.
70 million.
70 million a year.
Okay. And we basically foregone of a year's worth of savings trying to fix the program. Am I correct?
For PSPC, it's 50 million. And just to be clear, it's 70, because I'm saying it's 70 a year, 70.
Yeah, so your estimate to fix it is about 50 million.
Yes.
And your estimated savings was about 70 million. Yeah. I mean, not even the most conservative accountants would say that they're still plus or minus 5 to 10% on both those numbers. My last question is this. For me, it just seems like a simple solution, and I'm not an IT guy, that if somebody works, they get paid, right? Has there been discussion of cutting manual checks out to ensure that people have money in their pockets every 2 weeks? Because once upon a time we did it, a lot of businesses across the country do it, and I'm sure there's a way to get that done. And was there any discussion alluding to that to say, okay, you know what, this thing is going to take a lot longer than we anticipated to fix. Is there a possible way to, kind of solve the bottleneck in this process and start getting people their money, and then we will figure out how to fix this system?
So you may know that there is a process in place right now where within departments, within 24 hours, they can actually get a check, or if they want a direct deposit.
But is that every time? So let's say like I haven't got paid for 6 months or 4 months or something like that. Can I call every week and say I have an emergency, I need pay?
Yes, but I hope that your case will be resolved so you don't have to do that. But yes, and I would say that on top of that, though, what we did is we added a layer with the feedback form, so that people who wouldn't be able to get through their departments and didn't know where to go could actually fill out the feedback form, and we've committed to working with their departments to make sure that they get that. So we added this extra measure to make sure that people would have access to that.
Thank you, Madame Lemay. Monsieur Blaney.
Oui, thank you. Madame Lemay, j'ai une note.
Ms. Lemay, I have a note here that is dated from January concerning the implementation of the Phoenix Pay system, and you said that it was replacing an old system, and you commented on this today during your appearance before the emergency meeting.
And Phoenix project team's resources will be on site in Miramichi to assist during the implementation, including to address any system-related issues that may arise. ça, c'était en janvier, le 20 janvier 2016.
That was dated on January 20th, 2016, and now you're saying, well, that it didn't work. Can you explain to me how you realized that there was a major problem and that we hit a wall? And once again, I'd remind you that the union told us, the consultant said that, there were internal memos, but I would like to come back to training and how you can guarantee that by the end of the month, or by the end of the month of October, you will be able to reach a steady state. Well, first of all, just to be clear, we will not reach a steady state by the end of the month. No, October 31st, we will have addressed the backlog, and after that, we will have to work with the teams at Miramichi and the satellite offices to achieve a steady state, and when we achieve it, then we will be able to review how many people we need. But there is a transitional period between the two. November 1st, we will still have transactions that will be late, and we will need to do payouts, but we have 200 people, but you will have eliminated the backlog. And for that, you gave additional training. As you mentioned, you were talking about $16 million. My colleague who just joined us, well, finally, the projected cost is $50 million. Can you tell us how this money has been invested and how you obtained results? With respect to training, there was a lot of training identified before the implementation, but obviously not enough was done, and not the training that we needed. Not exactly in any case, because as I said, we underestimated the change management and the time, the importance, the significance of the change for users. So there are users, there are HR officers, and there are compensation advisors, and those three trainings are necessary for people for our compensation advisors. We have training on site. And by speaking with them, we realized that we needed to conduct additional training and different training. With the users, we are working with the Canada School of the Public Service to develop courses that will be a bit more, I would say, easier courses, because they exist already, but we need easier ones. And with HR teams, we have teams who are going into the departments and who are speaking about the three issues. Thank you very much, Madame Lemay. I would now share my time with my colleague.
There's a question regarding the partner you've been implementing this system with.
Mr. Liddy, you mentioned earlier there was just one outside party involved with the program. Is that correct?
That's, yeah,
like,
we hired...
If you consider, like, what do you consider IBM or PwC or these type companies?
Well, in terms of a role of a third-party independent review, it was SI Consultants.
No, I asked the question was specific, were any other consultants warned you do not go ahead?
No. We had discussions with IBM in May after we found defects, and they didn't say don't go ahead. We said, how long will it take you to resolve, and do you need to delay?
So none of the other consultants, however you term them, third-party, whatever, no one advised you don't go ahead?
Not to my knowledge. I don't know, Brigitte, if you have knowledge of...
No.
Is that a matter of, so not to your knowledge or no definite? Can you maybe get back to us if it's not a no definite?
I can get back to you. Yeah, but I was following the project very closely starting in May of 2015, so I'd be very surprised.
Our final 5-minute intervention will be Madame Shanahan.
Thank you, Chair. To the panel, I think you were here, Madame Lemay, you were here, and Mr. Liddy, when my colleague asked a question about what would a steady state look like, and that's what I want to tackle a little bit more. So the question about what was the rate of overpay, underpay, the sort of long-standing payroll problems that could exist under any payroll system. So what did it look like then? What do we expect that to look like in the future steady state scenario? And just further to that, I just would like to know what that will look like, what steady state will look like at the Miramichi Pay Center, the number of cases that employees can handle per day, You know, the additional full-time advisors that have been hired, will they be staying on? I realize you won't have all the answers, but we want to know what that steady state will have an idea of what it will look like.
Thank you for the question. One thing that is, in my mind, really important, and we have to not lose sight of it. We really believe that steady state will be better than where we were before. When we're in the steady state, we'll be in an environment where it will be easier for employees, self-serving. They will get their transaction done much faster. That's what the objective of steady state is. Less errors, timely. It will be a much better place. We're not there yet, but that's what it will be.
The stress will be considerably lower. Yes.
Yes. Just maybe I'll let Brigitte talk briefly about the overpayments before Phoenix, because you were asking for that number, and she does have it.
Yes, thank you. So at the time we went live with the new pay system, there was in the old pay system 18,000 cases of employees who had overpayments still for a value of $21.7 million. So that was the state of the affairs from an overpayment perspective before Phoenix. Now, those were not necessarily annual. It was the amount, a portrait of the amount at that particular point of time.
Okay. So the goal of steady state will be to be in a much better place. And do you want me to follow up on the question just in terms of Miramichi?
Yes, please. Yeah.
So in terms of number of cases in Miramichi, for example, that's one of the things that we don't know yet, and it's a very important factor actually, because how many cases will the compensation advisors be able to process when they are fully used to the system, when the system is optimized? And I mean, we had a plan, and that's what led to 550, the number of 550 compensation advisors. Will that be the end result? Maybe not. And if it is, then we will have to let go all of the satellite units, and we will keep our Miramichi office open and fully functional. And if we happen to need more compensation advisors, then we'll have to assess at that time. But steady state will not be calculated in number of compensation advisors. It will be calculated in timeliness in the service aspect. So timeliness, correctly of payment, and accurate payment, timeliness, and I'm missing one, but...
Okay, so you have those metrics in place. You know what you're going for as far as steady state?
So we have a pre-Phoenix metric. The one that we are working with now with colleagues is actually I'll say an end-to-end metric, because it's not just about the pay center. It's about from the moment somebody works to the moment they get paid, and there's a number of HR transaction or steps that have to be made. And we believe that if we're looking from a service point of view, and if we're thinking of the employees, that's what matters to them. So we're looking at now at the entire end-to-end.
Okay, very good. How much time do I have, Chair?
30 seconds.
Okay, share it with Nick.
Hi, I'm just getting some feedback from a question that I'd asked earlier about the number of complaints with respect to overtime pay since June 30th that you guys have received. What is the number of, I guess, PAR forms or Phoenix feedback forms that you guys have received since July 1st with respect to priority 3?
So I think there was two elements. Did you say overtime? Because the overtime
we'll
is
just
automatic.
go the priority 3 category of complaints since July 1st, just the number.
So our priority 3 is a fixed number. It started with 82,000 and it's now at 67,500.
No, you understand my question. That category of problems since July the 1st, how many have there been?
Well, there's a whole bunch of things in the backlog, right? It's a whole, so it's the normal transactions coming in. I'm not sure I do understand.
Exactly. How many new ones which you do not consider part of the backlog but are the same category of errors?
It's the normal flow of business. So they are like the normal flow.
You mean another 40,000?
Well, it would be more than that. The flow of business transactions come in, Miramichi.
No, that aren't processed. That are not processed.
That are not processed? Well, they're processed, but they're not processed. Some are processed in a timely fashion, and others are processed
could I suggest,
a little late.
I think I know what Nick's getting at. Perhaps offline, if we could, when we suspend here to go in camera, we'll have a couple of minutes. Perhaps, Nick, and you can get together and you can get the answer to Nick's question back to our committee.
Yeah.
But we'll move on. We have a 1 3-minute intervention left. It'll be Mr. Weir.
Yeah, I would just like to reinforce the point that it would be great if you could report back to the committee on what this number of new cases since July is. I tried to ask about that as well. Now, I suppose a little bit related to that, I'm wondering if somebody gets to December 31st and has still been paid the wrong amount, either because the backlog isn't fixed by October 31st or because of these new problems cropping up, what's the solution to ensure that they're not paying the wrong amount of income tax?
Well, that's something that we're turning our mind to. Our objective is really to try to solve as much as we can, but people will have to have interaction with employees too, because if they do not want us to do the recovering at a certain time, then we'll have to look at what the implications are at that point.
Okay, now you've characterized the Phoenix pay system as part of this modernization of the public service. And I wonder if you could give us a heads up about any other modernization efforts that the government has in the works.
Well, one of the things that we've been working on is actually the HR component of the system, because Phoenix is an integration of HR and pay, right? And now in our new world, HR equals pay, really. So part of there's one project to slowly implement initiative called MyGCHR, and that is one of the projects that we've been working on, are still working on, and we've actually delayed it a little bit because of Phoenix, and to be mindful of everything that's happening.
Okay, well, appreciate that you're delaying that one. Now, I did want to ask a little bit about the pay center in Miramichi. Before a labor tribunal this past week, the government seemed to be arguing that a big part of the problem was that Miramichi wasn't processing things quickly enough. And, I think that's unfair to the people that are working there under really tough conditions. But it does raise a broader question about why the government decided to situate the pay center in Miramichi in the first place. And do you believe that that was the right decision? Is that really the best place for it?
Well, I will tell you that the employees that we have there are really good employees. And I have visited the place. Mr. Leedy was there recently. The minister was there. Those employees are working very hard, and if at any time there was some miscommunication and anybody thought we were blaming them for that, that's not the case at all. They are hardworking employees, they're good employees.
Right, but to get to the question, you've had to set up pay centers in all these other areas. So is Miramichi the right place to have the National Pay Center going forward?
I would say that the satellite unit that we had to set up had nothing to do with location. It had to do with adding people to be able to process. So
it's just coincidental that you set up one of the centers in the National Capital Region to try to rehire the pay experts in this area that were laid off?
Well, that's where there was availability of people. We were in an emergency situation, wanting to set up a satellite unit so that we could help and pay employees as fast as possible. So it seemed very natural to do it here because there were people that were here.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we're going to have to cut it off there, Mr. Weir. Madame Lemay, Monsieur Liddy, Madame Votan, thank you once again for being here. I just have one question from the chair, if you wouldn't mind. You could submit this. We don't have to answer it today. Monsieur Grewal raised the question of there's perhaps 67,500 employees still on this list, this backlog list, but that doesn't necessarily mean how many cases there are. In fact, you were starting to say there's probably more than 2 or 3 cases per person. I'd be interested to know exactly how many cases are on the backlog section. If you could provide that information to the committee in a response. Thank you very much. We will suspend now for about 2 minutes and go directly into committee business, which will be in camera.
you.